kind of want to try something a little weird today. You game for that?
I am always game for weird. What are we doing?
Okay, so I want everyone listening to visualize this right now. You are in your bathroom. It is, say, 7 in the morning.
Right.
The lights are just a little too bright, maybe that harsh fluorescent buzz. You're brushing your teeth and you look up.
And you lock eyes with your reflection.
Exactly. You lock eyes with your reflection in the mirror. You see the tired eyes, the messy hair, that specific way your jaw sets when you haven't had coffee yet. And you say to yourself, okay, that is me. That is who I am.
The protagonist of the movie? You're
Yeah.
not the main character of your own life.
Yeah, the main character. But here is the question that actually kept me up last night while I was prepping for this deep dive. That person in the mirror, is that actually you?
Oh, wow.
Or, and this is the weird part, is that just a really, really convincing PR rep that you hired when you were like 5 years old?
That is a very dangerous question to ask first thing in a deep dive.
It really is, right? Because we have this massive stack of research today. And honestly, I gotta warn you, some of this stuff is heavy. It suggests that the you identify with the you that has a job title, a favorite coffee order, a specific personality type that might all be a total construct.
A psychological fiction. It is essentially the stranger in the mirror problem. And you are right, the research we are pulling from today, it is not your standard, rah-rah, find your passion, self-help stuff.
Not at all.
We are looking at some real heavy hitters. We've got Spinoza, we've got Nietzsche, Freud, Jung, Carl Rogers. And they are all pointing to this incredibly unsettling premise.
Which is what, exactly?
That most of our decisions, our fears, our attractions, even the things we think we hate, they are not actually coming from us.
They're coming from the programming.
Yeah, they're coming from invisible forces in the cockpit that we have literally never even looked at.
That is the terrifying part to me. We walk around thinking we are driving the car, but it turns out we're just the kid in the back seat with the little plastic steering wheel.
While something else is actually driving. Precisely. We often look at our lives and we think, oh, if I just had more money, or if I just had more time, or, if I was just a little smarter, then I'd be happy.
The classic external fixes.
Right. But what if the greatest limitation in your life isn't a lack of resources at all? What if it is a lack of genuine self-knowledge?
That is the big question. And today we are going on a mission to answer it. And I have to throw out a little disclaimer here based on the source material.
Please do.
If you are listening to this deep dive is not going to be entirely comfortable. We are going to poke at some things.
It really shouldn't be comfortable. Socrates famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah.
But the catch there, the fine print, is that examining your life requires facing parts of yourself that you have spent a lifetime hiding.
So if you start to feel a little defensive while listening to this,
That is actually a good sign. It means we are hitting the nerve. We are moving well past superficial slogans today. The goal is to understand why we deceive ourselves, how our identity is actually formed, and how to reach what I genuinely believe is the most powerful psychological insight of all.
freedom through awareness.
Exactly. So where do we start?
Let's start with the architecture of identity, because I think if you stopped 100 people on the street, most of them would say, of course I know myself. I know I am an introvert. I know I hate cilantro. I know I'm an accountant.
Right, but those are facts.
Mm-hmm.
That is just data. Knowing facts about yourself is not the same thing as understanding yourself.
That is a really crucial distinction. A list of traits isn't self-knowledge.
Think about it this way. You can know your resume completely by heart. You can know your Myers-Briggs type from some online test. But that doesn't explain why a specific offhand comment from a coworker makes you seethingly angry for 3 entire days.
Oh, yeah. Or why silence makes you anxious. That is a big one for me. If I'm in a room with someone and the conversation drops and it gets quiet, I physically have to fill the space.
You feel that compulsion.
Totally. And I know that I do it, but I don't necessarily know why I do it.
Exactly. Or why people self-sabotage right when things are finally going well in their relationships. Those whys are the actual doors to the inner world. You know Abraham Maslow?
Yeah, the hierarchy of needs guy.
Right. We usually just associate him with the pyramid. But he argued that self-actualization, becoming your best self, is literally impossible without profound self-awareness. You cannot become what you are capable of being if you are entirely unaware of what is driving you in the dark.
So let's name this driver. In the literature, we call it the ego. But I feel like that word has been completely ruined by pop culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if I say someone has a big ego, I just mean they're arrogant or they are a jerk.
In common parlance, yes, ego equals arrogance. But in the deep psychology we are looking at today, specifically Freud and later the ego psychologists, it is a much more technical mechanism. I want you to think of the ego not as a jerk, but as a manager.
A manager, like a middle manager at a corporation.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a highly frantic, stressed out middle manager whose only job is to keep the company from getting sued. And the company is you.
Okay, I like this analogy. So what is the manager actually doing all day?
The ego's prime directive is coherence. It needs to make sure that your internal story makes sense and that you remain safe in your social tribe. It is a survival mechanism, first and foremost.
Because evolutionarily speaking, fitting in kept us alive.
100%.
Ah.
If you are a hunter-gatherer and you act out in a way that gets you kicked out of the tribe, you die. You freeze or you starve. So the human brain developed this incredible software, the ego, to constantly scan the environment.
Scanning for threats.
Scanning for rules. It asks, who do I need to be right now to stay safe? Who do I need to be to get fed? Who do I need to be so my parents will love me?
So tying this back to childhood, if I'm 7 years old and I realize that making jokes and being funny stops my dad from yelling.
Bingo. The ego highlights that code immediately. It writes, be funny equals safety. And simultaneously, it suppresses the opposing code, being sad equals danger.
Wow. And then 30 years go by and I'm the funny guy at the dinner party who literally cannot tolerate a serious, emotionally vulnerable conversation.
Because the manager is still running the software from when you were 7. And this is where it gets really tricky. The ego prizes consistency over truth.
Wait, say that again? Consistency over truth.
Yes, if the actual visceral truth of the moment is, I am really sad and hurt right now. But the ego's survival script says, no, we are the funny guy, sadness is dangerous. The ego will literally edit your reality. It will repress the sadness before you even consciously register the
Hold
feeling.
on. You are saying it edits the live feed, like a tape delay in a sports broadcast.
A live tape delay, yes. There's psychological data on this phenomenon called perceptual defense. The brain actually takes longer to visually and cognitively recognize threatening stimuli than neutral ones. Your ego is physically blinding you to things that contradict your character description.
That is profoundly unsettling. It's like living in a Truman Show, but the director is a neurotic 5-year-old version of yourself.
That is a surprisingly perfect way to put it, and it relates heavily to Erik Erikson's work on identity formation. His big contribution was the idea that identity is formed through conflict.
Right, the developmental stages. Unpack that for us.
As you grow up, you hit these crucial developmental crossroads. Trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame, industry versus inferiority. If those conflicts aren't resolved in a healthy way.
Let's say your parents shamed you every single time you tried to assert your independence.
Exactly. That conflict doesn't just evaporate when you turn 18. It embeds itself directly into the ego as a rigid structural belief. The manager writes a new rule. I must never be independent. Independence leads to severe shame and rejection.
Which perfectly explains why you sometimes see full-grown, intelligent adults having meltdowns in the office that look exactly like a toddler's tantrum.
Because in the context of that specific emotional trigger, they are still a toddler. The ego is defending a childhood wound that never actually healed. And the tragic part is, society usually reinforces this.
How so?
We are deeply rewarded for being predictable. We are rewarded for staying in our lane and playing our labels. The funny guy, the smart girl, the reliable workaholic.
Ah, the comfort of the known. This is a huge theme in the source material.
It is the gravitational pull of human psychology. The brain strongly prefers familiar pain over uncertain happiness.
Familiar pain over uncertain happiness. That is bleak. But honestly, it makes total sense when you look at human behavior.
It is the only thing that explains why someone will stay in a highly toxic relationship for a decade. Or a soul-crushing job.
Because it's miserable, sure, but at least they know the rules of the misery. They know exactly how the Tuesday night argument with their partner is going to go.
Exactly. The known feels safe, even if it is killing you. The unknown is registered by the brain as a literal survival threat. To truly know yourself, you have to be willing to enter psychological uncertainty. You have to tolerate the terror of not knowing who you are, at least for a little while.
And that brings us right back to the silence thing I mentioned earlier. Why silence feels so threatening.
Right, your compulsion to fill the quiet room. Silence removes the audience. And without an audience, you cannot perform the role your ego has constructed.
If there's no one to laugh, I can't be the funny guy.
And if you aren't performing the role, who are you? You are left alone with the unknown, unmapped parts of yourself. And for the manager, that is a code red emergency.
So if the ego is the part of us standing in the spotlight, the role we show the world, what is happening in the dark?
This is where we get to Sigmund Freud's famous iceberg analogy.
Right, everyone knows the visual. The tip of the iceberg above the water is the conscious mind.
Yes, the conscious mind. The ego, your logical thoughts, your daily to-do lists, it's just a tiny fraction of the whole structure. Beneath the surface of the water lies a massive, invisible terrain, the unconscious.
Which is basically the storage unit for repressed emotions, traumatic memories, and all the stuff we just don't want to look at.
Correct. But Freud's student, Carl Jung, took this concept and expanded it exponentially. He said the unconscious isn't just a personal trash can for your repressed issues. It contains these universal inherited patterns he called archetypes. But most importantly, for our deep dive today, he introduced the concept of the shadow.
The shadow. I have to say, this is one of my absolute favorite psychological concepts, but it is also notoriously hard to really pin down. How do we clearly define the shadow?
The shadow consists of all the parts of yourself that you reject, deny, or hide because they do not fit your good self-image.
Okay, so let's use a practical example. If my core identity, my ego, is built around being the nice, accommodating guy, then my capacity for, say, cruelty or selfishness goes straight into the shadow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You still have those capacities, all humans do, but you refuse to identify with them. But here's the critical nuance. It is not just evil or bad stuff that goes into the shadow.
What else goes in there?
Gold goes in there too. If you grew up in a hypermasculine family that relentlessly mocked sensitivity or artistic expression, your tenderness and your creativity go into the shadow.
Oh, wow.
If you grew up in an environment where ambition was viewed as greedy or arrogant, your natural drive to succeed and be a leader gets shoved into the shadow.
So it is essentially just the not me bin. Anything that threatens the tribal connection goes in the bin.
So not me, Ben, yes. But here is the terrifying mechanism of control that Jung warned about. What you refuse to see within yourself will inevitably control you.
Because it doesn't just stay in the bin.
No, it is highly active. You think you've buried it, but you haven't. You've just put it behind your back where you can't see it, but it is still back there steering the ship.
Okay, I really want to get to the diagnostic part of this because up until now, this is incredibly fascinating, but it's very theoretical. It's like, ooh, I have a hidden shadow, very spooky. But the research provided this diagnostic tool called the irritation test.
Yes, the irritation test.
I actually tried it this morning while I was getting ready, and honestly, it sucked. I absolutely hated it.
It was brutally effective, precisely because it is so awful to experience.
It really is. So let's walk the listener through the mechanics of projection. Why do we hate certain people so deeply and irrationally?
It comes straight back to Jung. He famously wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the operative word there is irritates.
Right. We aren't talking about someone stealing your wallet. We aren't talking about objective harm.
No, we are talking about that visceral, totally disproportionate, ugh, I literally cannot stand that person feeling.
The guy at the airport gate who is talking way too loudly on his phone.
Perfect example. Now, the test requires you to ask yourself, why does that trigger you specifically? Because the person sitting next to you at the gate might be reading a book, and they literally couldn't care less. But your blood is boiling.
Well, my immediate defense is because he's rude. He is violating the social contract.
Is he? Or is he displaying a trait that you have strictly forbidden in yourself?
Oof. That is a gut punch.
Let's break it down. If your ego is heavily constructed around the rule, I am considerate, I make myself small, I do not take up space or bother people, then seeing someone boldly and shamelessly taking up space feels like a literal attack on your reality.
Because he's breaking my manager's core rule and he's getting away with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Jung would argue it goes even deeper. You are only triggered because there is a repressed part of you living in your shadow that desperately wants to be loud.
A part of me that wants to just not give a damn what anyone else thinks.
Yes. It is envious rage. You projected your own repressed loudness onto this random guy at the airport, and then you viciously attacked it in him because you aren't allowed to express it in yourself.
It's a movie projector. You think you're looking through a clear window at a jerk, but you are actually looking at a mirror reflecting your own locked-up desires.
It completely reframes human interaction.
It entirely changes how I look at the internet, too. I mean, think about social media and cringe culture. Entire communities are built around making fun of people for being
Oh,
cringe.
cringe culture is just mass shadow boxing.
Shadow boxing, that's a great term.
We mock people online who are trying too hard because we are secretly terrified of trying and failing ourselves. We mock people who are overly earnest or enthusiastic because we have wrapped ourselves in 20 layers of cynical irony just to feel safe.
So the homework for the listener here is pretty clear, if not totally daunting. The next time you feel the urge to leave a mean comment or you catch yourself aggressively gossiping about a coworker's annoying habit,
You have to stop and ask the golden question. What part of me is doing that?
or what part of me does this person represent?
That is the question that changes the trajectory of your life.
Which brings us directly to the concept of resistance. Because honestly, hearing you explain all this, part of me just wants to turn the microphone off. It is so much easier to just blame the loud guy at the airport and go on with my day.
Of course it is. And this is exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about. He argued that human beings deeply fear self-knowledge because it demands immense responsibility.
Break that down for us. Why responsibility?
If you do this work and you see your patterns clearly, if you realize you aren't just a passive victim of bad luck or victim of your parents or a victim of a corrupt society, you lose your scapegoats. You lose the ability to blame the world for your unhappiness.
That is a heavy loss. We love our scapegoats.
We do. If you clearly see that you repeatedly choose romantic partners who treat you poorly because it validates your own unconscious low self-worth, you can no longer cry to your friends, "Why does this always happen to me?"
You have to look in the mirror and say, why am I actively orchestrating this?
Clarity removes excuses. It forces you to recognize your own active participation in your own suffering. And the ego, absolute, hates that. It feels like death to the manager. So the ego becomes an absolute master artist of rationalization.
The art of rationalization. This is where we get into the idea that the ego doesn't lie, it distorts.
It reframes reality to protect the self-image. It's brilliant, really. Let's look at some common examples of how we reframe our shadow behavior.
Okay, let's do it. How about when someone says, I'm not being mean, I'm just being honest?
Classic. Often that is a pure rationalization for being cruel. You have a shadow desire to hurt someone or assert dominance, but your ego rule says, I am a good moral person. So the manager slaps a positive label on it and calls the cruelty honesty.
Wow. Okay, what about I'm just being patient with them?
Often a rationalization for cowardice or avoiding necessary confrontation. You're actually terrified to speak up and set a boundary, but you label the fear as patience or being the bigger person so you can feel superior instead of scared.
Man, that one hurts. What about the classic, I'm just fiercely independent?
Very often a cover for being deeply afraid of intimacy. If the unconscious fear is, if I let someone in, they will abandon me and destroy me, the ego builds a fortress and calls it independence. If I don't need anyone, I can't be hurt.
The ego really is a master spin doctor. It has a crisis PR team working 24/7 in our heads.
It does. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, mapped this out beautifully with his dual system theory. He showed that the vast majority of our decision-making is system one, automatic, unconscious, and highly emotional.
We act on pure impulse.
We act on impulse, and then our system two, the logical, rational brain comes in after the fact to write a beautifully logical press release justifying why we did it. We think we are rational creatures, but we're actually rationalizing creatures.
So true psychological knowledge begins when you learn to spot the gap. The gap between your logical explanation for your behavior and the actual behavior itself.
Exactly. When you catch yourself frantically explaining why you just snapped at your spouse over loading the dishwasher, you have to stop. Look at the gap. The complex explanation about loading plates correctly, that is the ego's PR team. The sudden burst of anger, that was the shadow leaking out.
Okay, so we have thoroughly torn down the house at this point. We know the ego is a constructed manager, we know the shadow is hiding all our repressed material in the basement, and we know we are projecting our internal movies onto everyone around us.
The illusion is dismantled.
Right. So how do we actually live with this? How do we fix it? Or I guess not fix it because it's not a broken bone, but how do we integrate it? What are the practical pathways here?
The research gives us three clear pathways. The first is emotional literacy, and this pulls heavily from Carl Rogers' work in humanistic psychology.
And I want to clarify, because when I first read emotional literacy, I thought of, the stereotypical therapist couch. Just get in touch with your feelings, cliche.
It's much more rigorous than that. It is about extreme precision. The barrier for most people is that we habitually suppress our emotions because our culture teaches us that suppression equals strength, or we think emotions are inherently irrational and useless.
The whole "I don't have time to be sad, I have a presentation at 2 o'clock" mindset.
Exactly. But suppression doesn't delete the energy. It just pushes that psychological energy down into the unconscious. And it doesn't just sit there quietly, it mutates. It comes out as chronic migraines or lower back pain or a sudden explosive rage at a red light or a drinking compulsion.
So what is the actual solution if suppression doesn't work?
Precise, granular labeling. Most adults have a incredibly low resolution emotional vocabulary. When you ask them how they feel, they say, I feel bad. I feel upset. I'm stressed.
I feel weird right now. That's my go-to.
Weird gives you zero actionable data. You need to upgrade the resolution. You have to move from the vague, I feel bad, to I feel a deep sense of disappointment, or I feel intense envy, or I feel humiliated.
Why does finding the exact specific dictionary word matter so much?
Well, there's the neurological truth of name it to tame it. Assigning a word activates the prefrontal cortex and literally calms the amygdala. But deeper than that, you have to realize that anxiety, anger, and sadness are not your enemies. They are information packets.
Information packets. I really like that framing.
They are raw data about unmet needs or violated boundaries. If you feel resentment, that specific emotion is information telling you that you are overgiving or you're failing to speak your truth in a relationship. If you feel envy, that is highly valuable data pointing directly to what you secretly desire but haven't given yourself permission to pursue.
Carl Rogers had this profound insight that real growth begins when you can experience your feelings without distortion. You don't necessarily have to act on them, though.
That is the crucial separator. You do not have to scream and throw a plate just because you feel anger. Acting out is not the goal. But you absolutely must acknowledge that the anger exists within you. You must say internally, I'm experiencing the energy of anger right now. That simple acknowledgement creates a tiny, vital bit of space between you and the emotion.
You stop being the emotion and you start observing the emotion, and in that space, there is choice.
Exactly. You reclaim your agency.
Let's move to the second practical pathway. The compulsion to repeat. This goes back to Jung, right? It's basically advanced pattern recognition.
Jung called it the compulsion to repeat, yes.
Yeah.
He observed in his patients that unconscious, unresolved material constantly seeks resolution by reenacting itself in the external world.
It's like a ghost haunting a house, just trying to tell the same tragic story over and over again until someone finally listens to it.
That is a beautiful, very accurate analogy. If you felt deeply unheard and invisible as a child, your unconscious will compulsively choose romantic partners who do not listen to you. You are setting up the same exact play with different actors, trying to finally win that unwinnable childhood battle.
So how do we actually identify the loop in our own lives?
You have to become an objective auditor of your own biographical data. Look for the repeats. One bad micromanaging boss is an unfortunate event. 3 bad bosses in 3 different industries who all treat you the exact same way. That is a pattern.
One terrible breakup is a tragedy. 5 breakups that all end with the other person using the exact same phrase, like, you're too emotionally distant. That is a structural architecture.
These are not coincidences. You are the common denominator in all of your life's recurring dramas. Identifying the loop is incredibly painful, but it is the absolute first step to breaking it. You have to look at the recurring disaster and ask, what is the familiar feeling I'm secretly trying to recreate here?
That requires so much radical honesty. And the third pathway involves something literally nobody wants to deal with: suffering.
We turn to Viktor Frankl for this. He was a brilliant psychiatrist and, of course, a Holocaust survivor. His work on meaning is profound. Modern Western culture is obsessed with eliminating suffering. We numb it, we distract ourselves with screens, we medicate it away. But existential psychology says the exact opposite. You must listen to it.
Suffering as a teacher.
The psychological pivot you have to make is this. Stop asking the victim question, why is this happening to me? And start asking the seeker question, what is this suffering trying to teach me about myself?
I'll be honest, that is a really hard pivot to make when you are in the middle of a crisis. When you're in real pain, you just want it to stop.
It is incredibly hard. But pain is the ultimate destroyer of illusions. When you are truly, deeply suffering, say, going through a brutal divorce or a major health crisis, you instantly stop caring about your ego's image. You stop caring about the shallow, performative stuff. Pain violently forces you to look at what you actually value. versus what you thought you valued.
Burns down the dead forest so new things can actually grow.
Yes. And if you have the courage to listen to the pain without numbing it, it almost always points directly to a false, rigid belief that your ego has been clinging to.
So if we actually do this grueling work, we build emotional literacy, we rigorously track our patterns, we let our suffering teach us what happens on the other side, what is the transformation?
The ultimate realization is a fundamental shift in how you view your own existence. You stop trying to solve yourself like you're a broken math problem.
If I just go to enough therapy and fix this one specific neurosis, then I'll finally be perfect and happy.
Right, the self-improvement treadmill.
Yeah.
You step off of that. You start understanding yourself not as a fixed object to be perfected, but as an ongoing process.
There's a great quote from Spinoza in the research about this. Freedom begins with understanding necessity.
Baruch Spinoza. It's a dense philosophical concept, but practically, he meant that if you can understand the hidden cause and effect chain of your own mind, you actually gain freedom from it. If I know exactly how my anger arises, I know the specific trigger, I know the childhood root of that trigger, I know the physical sensation in my chest before I yell the way I yell, the anger loses its compulsive demonic power over me.
It's like seeing the strings on a marionette puppet. Once you can clearly see the strings pulling the arms, the puppet isn't scary anymore. It's just mechanics.
Exactly. You move from reaction, which is a totally automatic, unconscious reflex, to response, which is a deliberate, conscious choice.
And this leads us to the ultimate distinction in this whole deep dive, the difference between identity and awareness.
This is where psychology starts to border on the spiritual. Identity is nothing but the labels. I'm a senior VP. I'm a successful entrepreneur. I am a perfect mother. I am a failure. Awareness is the quiet space that simply notices those labels.
So identity is the weather, but awareness is the sky. The clouds just pass through it.
That is exactly it. Awareness is present when you achieve your greatest success, and that exact same awareness is present when you hit rock bottom and fail miserably. If you can anchor your sense of self in awareness rather than identity, you can lose your job, you can lose your social status, you can even lose your health, and you won't lose yourself.
Because you realize you are the observer of the experience, you are not the experience itself.
Precisely. You are the space in which the life happens.
That sounds incredibly peaceful. But the research also makes a point to mention that arriving at this state involves a period of intense grief.
The grief of awakening. It is a very surprising side effect for a lot of people who start doing deep introspection. Knowing yourself often brings on a very quiet, heavy period of mourning.
Why do we grieve? What are we mourning?
You mourn the time you lost to unconsciousness. You look back at your 20s or your 30s with this new, clear vision, and you see all the major life choices you made, purely out of fear. You see the good people you pushed away or hurt because you were projecting your own unhealed shadow onto them. You see the incredible opportunities you walked away from just because your manager was trying to keep you safe from failure.
That hits really hard, the weight of the what could have been.
It is heavy, but, and this is absolutely vital for anyone experiencing this, to hear this grief is not a setback. It is not a sign that you are doing the work wrong. It is a sign of profound psychological health. You cannot mourn what you couldn't see. The fact that you are feeling that grief means you are finally awake. You just haven't let that grief wash completely through you.
It's the cost of admission to living a real, authentic life.
It is the toll you pay on the bridge to reality, yes.
So we have gone through the dark night of the soul here. We've looked at the ego, the shadow, the projections, the grief. Let's talk about the other side of the bridge. What does the new way of living actually look like? If I'm genuinely doing this work and living with self-knowledge, how is my random Tuesday morning different?
The very first thing you will notice is a drastically decreased tolerance for superficiality.
Like office small talk just becomes painful?
It just becomes utterly uninteresting. Your brain won't engage with it. You start seeking real depth in your interactions. You want to know what people are genuinely feeling and struggling with, not just what they're doing for the weekend. You develop a deep craving for authenticity, even if it's messy.
And I imagine compassion plays a huge role here, too.
It is a massive shift. You naturally start to judge other people a lot less. When you see someone acting out in public, being terribly arrogant or highly defensive or snapping at a waiter, you don't just reflexively hate them anymore. You recognize the underlying mechanism.
You see the strings on their puppet, too.
Yes. You think, I know exactly what that internal struggle feels like. I know what it's like to be completely controlled by a terrified ego.
You see the scared, defensive kid operating the machinery inside the loud, obnoxious adult.
Exactly. And turning that compassion inward for yourself You stop constantly asking the exhausting self-help question, how do I become better? And you start asking a much more profound question, how do I become more real?
How do I become more real? I absolutely love that. It goes back to the idea that wholeness isn't about perfection. It is about integration.
It means finally accepting all the contradictions of being human. You can be a deeply kind person and still have moments of intense selfishness. You can be incredibly brave and still be terrified of the dark. You don't have to waste your life energy hiding the bad parts in the basement anymore.
And think about the energy release. It's like that old metaphor of trying to hold a giant beach ball underwater. That is what we do with our shadow. It takes so much constant, exhausting, muscular effort. When you finally just let the ball pop up to the surface, you get all that daily energy back. You can use it for creativity, for true connection, for actually living.
You become fluid. You become fully alive rather than just managed.
This has been an incredibly intense deep dive, but in the absolute best way possible. As we wrap this up, I want to leave our listener with something to chew on, because as we've established, self-knowledge is not a final destination. You don't just read Jung, arrive at enlightenment, and get a framed certificate.
No, it is a lifelong practice of attention. It is a new way of being in the world.
So here is the final provocation drawn from today's source material. And I want you, the listener, to really sit with this question after the audio stops.
The question is this. If you were to start living from a place of genuine awareness rather than unconscious habit, if you operated from deep understanding rather than ego assumption, what is the very first thing that would change in your life right now?
Not what would change in 5 years, right now. Today,
Well,
what is the habit you would finally stop doing? What is the truth you would finally start saying out loud?
finding the answer to that question is where the real work begins.
And that is where your real life begins. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.